RTV6, Indianapolis This Week.
Welcome to Indianapolis This Week. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I'm Jason Fechner, and we begin with this week's political bombshell making headlines from the State House now to the nation's capital. New documents showing then Governor Pence was using an AOL account for public business while he and other Republicans blasted Hillary Clinton for her own private email use, though on a private server. Governor Eric Holcomb's office released 29 pages of emails, all sent from Pence's private AOL account during his time as governor. The emails show the former governor communicated with top-level staff and cabinet members about state business, including several matters of public safety and homeland security. Several dealt with the screening of Syrian refugees. Another commented on the Indiana Department of Homeland Security's state-level response after the attack on Canada's parliament. Pence didn't break any state law with the use of that private email, but the vice president's press secretary says Pence's account was compromised last summer by a phishing scam. Those documents obtained by RTV6 show Pence used that email account during last year's presidential campaign. The vice president's press secretary called any comparison between Pence's email and Clinton's private email server absurd, since Pence didn't deal with issues of national security. In a statement, Mark Lauder said that Pence complied with the law to ensure that state-related emails are being transferred and properly archived by the state. Lauder went on to say the emails are being managed according to Indiana's Access to Public Records Act. Our political insiders standing by to weigh in. Much ado about nothing or political spin as usual. That's later in the show. Meanwhile, this weekend, congressional Democrats right now are calling for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign, even after he recused himself from any investigation having to do with Russian ties to the Trump administration. It comes after revelations this week that Sessions met twice with the Russian ambassador during the 2016 campaign. He held a press conference on Thursday in which he hoped it would ease the controversy.
I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign.
As Democrats demand Sessions' resignation, the president stood by him this week. Sessions says his meetings were not as a Trump campaign official and were appropriate as a then senator. Democrats say he intentionally misled Congress during his confirmation hearings, and they point to a specific exchange with Senator Al Franken.
Anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign. What will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Sessions says he answered the question honestly. On September 7th of last year, then candidate Trump made headlines for calling Putin far more of a leader than President Obama. Turns out Sessions met with the Russian ambassador in his office the very next day. President Trump has said he wasn't aware of that meeting. Meanwhile, in Indianapolis this week, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder told RTV6 that Sessions is doing the right thing by recusing himself from the investigation into Russian interference. We asked him if he thinks Sessions should actually step down. Here's RTV6 State House reporter Katie Hines.
Do you think Jeff Sessions should have resigned?
I don't think on the basis of what I've heard so far that there is a basis for resignation. I think there is a need to investigate further what the nature of his contacts was with the Russians, and I understand that Congress might be doing something in that regard.
What's at stake when it comes to the integrity of the investigation into possible Russian interference in the election?
Well, I mean, what's at stake is the fate of our democracy. We were essentially attacked in a cyber way by the Russians. They made an attempt to interfere with the most important decision that we make as Americans, who's going to be the president of the United States. And I think that we have to investigate that. We have to understand who was involved. We have to understand all that happened, and then we have to take retaliatory steps, it seems to me, based on those investigative steps.
Who should lead that investigation?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think the Deputy Attorney General would be the person who would normally do that. We don't have a Deputy Attorney General at this point. He has a confirmation hearing coming up. But the next question is, should it be the Deputy Attorney General, or should there be a special counsel? And I think that really is something I'm not quite sure how I feel about. I think that the career people at the Justice Department are capable of doing a good investigation, and so we'll see what happens.
Do you think Sessions has a responsibility to disclose what he discussed with the Russian ambassador?
I think to the extent that he can, that would be a good thing, to put on the record, to be as transparent as he possibly can. What was the nature of the conversation? Why was he talking to the Russian ambassador on the 2 occasions, as I understand it, that he did? I think some transparency there, some expression of what actually happened would be a good thing.
Now, amid the Jeff Sessions controversy, President Trump is calling for unity. He did so in his largest speech since Inauguration Day, delivering that address to a joint session of Congress for the first time last week. We saw a much different, and some would say a softer tone. He touched on the wall that he says he still plans to build between the U.S.-Mexican border. He also called to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, as well as to increase military spending.
I am asking all members of Congress to join me in dreaming big and bold and daring things for our country.
With that, many Democrats and Republicans still concerned about his plans for the Affordable Care Act, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
The reality, once again, the Republicans in the Trump administration are in a total pickle. They can't put a plan together because they don't know how to deal with it.
They're apparently working on that plan this weekend. President Trump is also proposing major cuts to some federal agencies and what he calls historic tax reform. Amidst that ongoing call for unity from the president, Dan Quayle's former chief of staff, Republican Bill Kristol, is calling for a bit of an enhanced role for Vice President Pence. He says Pence's time in the White House could be unprecedented. We sat down one-on-one with Kristol here in Indy, and what he says is in front of Pence is eye-opening.
Pence, I think, could have a much more visible and probably more central role. The Trump White House has almost no one who has served in the federal government. They have, I think, literally no one at the very senior level who served in the White House or in the executive branch. But the person who knows the most about how Washington works in the Trump White House is Mike Pence. If you imagine the Trump cabinet meeting or the Trump Oval Office meeting, and they're good, they're a mixture of people, some of them are good, some of them not so good, whatever, but the one thing they all have in common, no government experience, except for Mike Pence and Mike Pence's team. So Pence, and you know what? You need to pass legislation if you want to be a successful president. If you want to change America, you can do some stuff with executive orders, you can do some stuff with the bully pulpit, but basically you need to get legislation passed through Congress. Who has served in Congress and in a leadership role in Congress? Mike Pence. So I think Pence could be quite important to the success or failure of the Trump administration.
Kristol went on to tell us that Vice President Pence can't focus on Indiana more than any other state while in the White House, of course. He says that Pence's experience in the House and his political connections is more important to the Trump administration than the fact he was a governor. You can find our complete interview now with Kristol right now at theindychannel.com. Simply click on the politics section. Meanwhile, former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard could be in the running for a position overseas for the Trump administration. He told RTV6 the Trump team is interested in his background as a Marine along with his experience as mayor here. He says last month's meeting with the transition officials went in a different direction than he expected, and he's absolutely interested in the opportunity to serve his country again.
We'll have to see. I mean, all those things that Marines and soldiers and sailors do, whatever the mind tell. I mean, my last duty station was at European Command in Stuttgart, Germany, and I was doing plans there, so that might be of some interest to them, that sort of thing.
Ballard says he has talked with the Trump staff every couple of weeks, and he says he thinks any possible offer or decision is still a few months out. Still to come, Madam C.J. Walker, an icon in Indianapolis and really all around the world, having such a huge impact on our city. We're going to take a look at her legacy through the eyes of her great-great-granddaughter. It's a story you can't miss. Coming up, you're watching Indianapolis This Week, only on RTV6. Welcome back. Madam C.J. Walker had a huge impact on Indianapolis and really all around the world as America's first female self-made millionaire. And we're taking a look at her legacy through the eyes of her great-great-granddaughter, A'Lelia Bundles. Bundles is a Hoosier native, acclaimed author and veteran journalist as well. Our own Erica Fly caught up with her at a very special venue, the Madam Walker Theater.
Tell me about the feeling that you get when you walk into this historic landmark.
This building is magic for me, in so many ways. It brings back memories of walking into the building when I was a little girl, when my mother worked on the 4th floor. We'd ride up the elevator. Mary, the elevator operator who always had rouge and perfectly coiffed hair. And now as an adult and seeing that the building has been preserved, that it's a National Historic Landmark that welcomes amazing entertainers and speakers, makes me feel so happy that it has been able to continue the legacy of Madam Walker.
Tell us about Madam C.J. Walker's story of success.
Her hair began to fall out, and she developed an ointment and a shampoo that healed her scalp disease and turned it into a business. Her story is really one of the most amazing American success stories. Her parents had been enslaved. She was born 2 years after the end of the Civil War in 1867 on the same plantation where her parents had been enslaved, and yet by the time she died in 1919 at 51 years old, she was a millionaire. So I love the fact that Madam Walker had a successful business, but I really love that she employed other women, that she was a patron of the arts, a philanthropist, a political activist who was contributing large amounts of money to community organizations, to schools, to the anti-lynching movement.
How did Indianapolis play a role in that story?
She came to Indianapolis in 1910 because Indianapolis had a really thriving black business community. It was, as it is now, the crossroads of America. For somebody who had a mail order business, this was a perfect location to headquarters your company.
You are doing a great job following in her footsteps as her great-great-granddaughter, so accomplished in your own right. What do you take from her story and what you know about Madam C.J. Walker and apply it to your life?
When I was growing up, my mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company, and so my mother was really my direct role model, and I watched that she was president of the PTA, that she was involved in politics, and so I took those lessons. Well, those are some of the same lessons that Madam Walker provides for me, that you make some money and you give some money, that you have excellence really as your watchword, and that you use the good gifts that you have to try to make a contribution in your community.
Our thanks to you both. Still such an incredible story all these years later. Bundles is Madam Walker's biographer and shares her legacy through both her books and public speaking events. Well, time now for I Say, You Say, our weekly commentary segment where we hear from someone in the community about what they think. Our guest today, Amber Stearns, the news editor for the weekly publication you see all over Indy, Nouveau.
When I was a kid, I used to hate it when we sang America the Beautiful in elementary school. Now, I know it's a beautiful song that is a tribute to our country, but for me, it proved an old adage incorrect. Sticks and stones may break bones, but words, well, they can hurt too. Imagine being a 6 or 7-year-old kid who suddenly becomes the center of negative attention as an entire class screams "Amber waves of grain" at you at the top of their lungs and making jokes. I still flinch to this day at the phrase. It made me hate my name and, even worse, question my self-worth. I was 13 years old before I learned that amber was actually petrified tree sap and considered a beautiful jewel in Eastern European countries. I was in college when amber became super cool because Jurassic Park taught us how to imagine extracting dinosaur DNA from mosquitoes trapped inside. But I realized words and their intent really do matter. Words can be used to hurt and to heal, to lift up and to tear down, to enlighten as well as delude. I became a journalist to use my words for enlightenment and healing. Like so many of my colleagues, I seek the truth and report it. So when I hear what we do called fake news, or that they're only words, it doesn't matter, it hurts, like those amber waves of grain. But I know that what true journalists do is like petrified tree sap. It's real, it's true, and it's beautiful. I'm Amber Stearns, and that's what I say.
News editor at Nouveau, Amber Stearns, thank you so much. And we want to know what you say. Let us know what you think of what Stearns had to talk about, or anything on your mind about Indianapolis this week. And you can reach out to us on Twitter, on the RTV6 Facebook page, on the RTV6 app, or at theindychannel.com, or all of them, whatever works. Next up on Indianapolis this week, we're going to sit down with our political insiders as they analyze the revelations about Pence's private email account used for state business. That's coming up next.
10 on RTV6.
And welcome back to Indianapolis this week. We are joined now by our political insiders, Mary Beth Schneider, of course, Kip 2 for the Democrats, our favorite conservative commentator, Abdul Hakim Shabazz. And let's start off by talking about Mike Pence, AOL, his emails, and state business. Kip is very fired up about all of this, but Mary Beth, let's start with you.
Well, I want to give a big shout out to the Indianapolis Star. Tony Cook did a really good job here. It became known that Pence had an AOL account last summer when it was hacked and somebody sent out one of those ones, you know, we're stuck in the Philippines and we need money, when he clearly wasn't. They put in FOIA requests at some point here. I'm not exactly sure when, but it took the Pence office months to respond. Finally got that stuff showing he was doing state business on his private email.
Not breaking the law,
not
though.
Illegal, but the hypocrisy is hip deep here. When you're going around, you know, saying lock her up about Hillary Clinton having a private email server, it would have behooved you to at least admit that you also used private email.
Kip, take it away.
Well, we spent, I think, as a country, at least a year, maybe over a year, doing investigations of Hillary Clinton because of the email issue. The Vice President of the United States knew this the entire time, fanned the flames of this faux controversy, all the while knowing he was doing precisely the same thing that she was doing. And I think the hypocrisy...
I don't recall a private server at the governor's residence.
It's a distinction without a difference. He was using private email. The reason she set up the private server is so she could have private communications. The exact same thing. The fact that it wasn't a server in the governor's residence is immaterial. It is the question of what you're supposed to be doing with your private email and what you're not supposed to be doing with your private email. And you're not supposed to be, according to Mike Pence and every public statement he made for a year, using your private email for public purposes. And that's what he was doing.
Allow me to throw in this thing called the law. Because in Indiana, the law does not prohibit elected officials from using their private email to engage in conversations about public discussion. I've engaged in a number of conversations with a number of elected officials via their private email.
Do you care sharing them with us today? Everybody that you've had private conversations in private email with, I think these folks would like to know who those people are.
Including yours?
Yeah, I mean,
you're right that it's not against the law, but what it does is skirt the law, because you are supposed to have state business done in an open way and be available for public record searches. And his private email was not easily available. If somebody else in another agency was doing a public record search, they are not going to pull out all the ones that are on the AOL server.
But that's where I have to respectfully differ with Mary Beth, because whenever I ask for doing a public records request, I always ask for all public email and email that might have gone on individuals' private email addresses, because just the nature of how we do business these days, there's going to be some communication on from somebody's Gmail, Yahoo, somebody may still have an old Excite email account.
AOL.
AOL out there somewhere. So in the nature, now the thing is, when you're requested, they try to lie to, they try to conceal, they try to conduct state business. That is a fair, legitimate question. But the fact that it was automatically private does not automatically, make it below board.
You see no hypocrisy here from the Vice President and the now President of the United States spending a year trying to exploit the fact that
hypocrisy and politics. Oh my Lord, Mr. Tousse, it isn't so.
She said it
isn't so.